We're not silly ever.
Is this where you start the podcast? Hey guys, it is flyGIRL. It is Cockpits and Cocktails 2021 Season 2. My co-host,
Natalie flyGIRL Kelley.
We are back at you and we are so excited for Season 2. We hope that you enjoyed Season 1 as much as we did. So thank you for sticking in there with us. Thank you for learning with us, and we look forward to having you this season.
I'm pumped. Are you?
Cheers.
Cheers.
All right, Natalie. So what do you got? What do we have for them this year? What do you think is going to happen in this year's podcast?
Well, you and I, of course, have talked a lot, and we get a lot of feedback from friends and from listeners, and it's been interesting to kind of come together. And some of our supporters and people that are interested in really getting behind the podcast have offered up suggestions of things to do. So one of them was that we would video our podcast and make them available on YouTube. So we're going to be doing that. Yay!
Means we're gonna have to look decent half the time now.
I know. Makeup and no t-shirts and frumpy hair, so we have to actually look really good or as good as we possibly can, right?
So we hope you guys will get on over and like and follow, subscribe, all the YouTube, all the podcasts. We will be very inclusive for everybody this year, trying to be a little bit better on all the streams.
Yeah. And the other thing, of course, that you and I have talked about have been incorporating some giveaways.
Oh, because who hates a giveaway, right?
Yeah. So, we have some relationships with some people in aviation, and they are excited about this podcast and offered up suggestions on things that they could do to help. And, they're all into, if you're in aviation, then you want to support others in aviation. So they're like, hey, what can we do? We've talked about it, and we've collaborated a little bit with some ideas, and there are several companies and organizations that want to help out and are willing to donate some items. So we're going to incorporate some kind of ways where you listen to the podcast, and we'll give either a hint, a password, something like that you can enter on the flyGIRL website that will put you in for the giveaway. We haven't really 100% worked out the details, but that's sort of what we're thinking, right?
So definitely stay tuned in all of the episodes and definitely listen for those keys, because we are going to try to throw in some fun giveaways for you guys and also keep you on your toes and see if you're actually listening.
That's all right. Yeah. So last season, our first season, I can't believe that whole year went by so fast. There were some really great guests. Some of, I wouldn't say some of my favorites. They were all my favorites, but I enjoyed Aaron and Nicole and Patty, of course. Sandra, someone I've gotten to know. And what about you? What were some that you remember?
Oh, I have goosebumps right now. I don't know if you can see that, but I think about Heather Penny's riveting story from 9/11. And every time I tell somebody that story, and that's the podcast, I tell people to go listen to this, because you cannot miss that one.
Yeah, I agree. That's a really good one.
It's been really great to learn more about the different aspects of aviation that you can get into with Patty and her aerobatics, and Sandra, and doing the corporate flying and flight attendant job, to fighter pilots, to aircraft sales, avionics sales. There's so much out there. And I thought flying airplanes was aviation, but it's this bigger entity of women and people.
Yeah.
And I think it's so awesome to hear their stories and get to learn more about the ins and outs of the entire industry.
Absolutely. And I think, because of course 2020 it's just been a crazy year with COVID and everything. And initially, you and I like to go to air shows and as much as possible. I'm not sure if we could have done that and had done all these podcasts, with these great guests and how that would have worked. So maybe it was kind of like a blessing in some way that we could actually take the time to do these podcasts and dig a little bit deeper in some of the history and learn a little bit more about these women. I don't know how thorough we could have been if we were doing the whole air show thing. Now, I'm not saying I don't want to do that, because of course I do, but
and their schedules. It's like, even trying to do it this year, we had to respect each other's schedules and our time. And so, we all have different jobs and careers that we're in, and then they're doing the air shows and stuff like that. So yeah, it's definitely hard. And I guess I'm really thankful for the last year and getting to know these women and connecting to so many female aviators that I think this was a great year to start. So
totally. And now, we can say that we're friends with Patty Wagstaff, and maybe she can get us on the what's that center stage or whatever they call it at the air shows, right in the center,
like the podium.
Like right there. Maybe now that we have this connection, she can get us in there.
I mean, phone a friend.
Yeah. Exactly.
Make connections. And that's the craziest thing, is like anybody in aviation wants to talk about aviation. So it's really fun to get into a conversation. And I think you and I have both learned that you really don't know what to expect. Like, I think we have a game plan of how our podcast is supposed to go in the beginning. And then sometimes it goes in like these crazy directions that you're like, whoa, I had no idea it was going there. But
True.
I think that's the beauty of it as well.
Yeah, and we try to let the guests kind of lead the way and talk about what they want to talk about, and that's how we probably typically learn the most. If we were just sticking to questions all the time, we may not get a real in-depth behind the scenes, behind the person kind of story.
Yeah, if you guys can't tell, this is not scripted.
Exactly. Yeah. No.
Not a scripted podcast. We like to have fun, keep it light, and let our guests guide the way. And I think about most of the year we did one guest at least per month, sometimes two. And we then started doing some recaps and things. And I think this year we had the idea that we both learned so much when we did trivia nights and lives. I think we learned a lot, and I really loved that part of it. So I hope that we can incorporate a little bit of, the history behind these women and behind the women that, laid the foundation for us in aviation and kind of paved the way. So I think I'm really excited for that this year as well.
Yeah. So one of the things you and I talked about yesterday, I guess, was really digging more into, a lot of these women that we talked to were trailblazers. I mean, Patty Wagstaff, Nicole Malikowski, Heather Penny. And it really made us think about, okay, so, what else do we not know about and female pilots in the past? And there's a lot, that we don't know. So you and I did some reading. We actually got most of this information off the Women in Aviation .org website. They have a great article on there about the 100 most influential women in aviation. And I think there's probably some things that really stood out to you, some things that really stood out to me that I thought we could talk about. And hopefully, all the listeners will be intrigued and really want to do some of their own research. And I love it when like one particular story really resonates with me, and once it's like I want to know more about that person, and then you just start finding books or things like that on them, and that just expands your knowledge.
Yeah, I think the coolest thing was like learning a little bit about the WASP with Aaron this year, and that kind of stemmed my ideas of, man, I really want to read more and learn more. And I think some people had given me some, aviation type books, but they were actually about love stories and this kind of thing. But it's crazy how they all kind of link in, and there are actually like names that will poke out to you that are in this list. And it's kind of like is full circle.
Right.
because
Yeah.
I think
Like, oh yeah, I remember that person. Yeah.
yeah, for some reason, like, I guess we both got into aviation later in life, and I've only been in it for about 3 years, so I don't know what a B-17 is, or all of these airplane types at air shows and things, learning. But when you start to learn these names, I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is like the coolest thing, that these women were flying these airplanes back before, they were testing them for the men. And it's just so cool to know the history of it, just because I didn't grow up knowing a lot about aviation. So
yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
So one of the things when I was going through it, there was quite a few things, but one of the themes that I thought I kind of wanted to hit on were some of the women that were in the article I'd heard of, some of them I hadn't, and then there were books or TV shows that I've seen that really talk about that specific person or event. And I thought, I like to read, so I thought I would share kind of what those books were. And at the time when you're reading, sometimes you don't really know how significant that person was or that event, and until you gather more information and you learn more about that person or that time. And then it's just like, oh wow, I want everybody to read this book, I want everybody to see this.
Yeah, I'm the same way.
Yeah. So what about you? Talk about some of the things that or the people that really stood out to you and the accomplishments.
Well, I think, most people, when they think, female aviation, they think Amelia Earhart. Like, that's like my first and only real knowledge way back when of aviation. I'm like, oh yeah, she was, the cool pilot that paved the way. But it's crazy, she did the Atlantic flight. She actually didn't do it solo the first time. She did it with someone. She was a passenger, and then it was, I think, like 4 years later that she ended up doing the solo flight. So that was kind of cool. And then she disappeared a few years after that, when she was doing the other around the world.
Yeah.
She might have been the first. Was she the first Pacific pilot as well? I'm not really sure. I have to look back to the article.
Yeah. Okay. So, first woman to fly across the Atlantic as a passenger. So the first woman to fly across the Atlantic as a passenger, which is really interesting. First woman, that was in 1928. And then the first woman to fly across the Atlantic solo.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then she flew the first person, not just male or female, to fly from Hawaii to California.
Yeah, the Pacific. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and then there's actually always it's so funny how people are so intrigued with her story.
Yeah.
And, like, she lived on an island, or she there's all these it's an ongoing story. It's a mystery. Yeah. We like closure. People like
closure. I want to know, like, what happened.
Exactly.
We didn't have Facebook back then. We didn't have the online.
Right.
We didn't have, the mail was delivered through the air. I think that's one really cool thing that I love to read about, is like the air mail and the transport system. And I don't know if you've ever seen one. I don't know what they called them, but there are these arrows.
Yeah.
Like the markings, and those were like waypoints to make sure that they knew they were still on course.
Isn't that crazy?
And they would navigate via like towns or and I remember reading a book, and they were talking about navigating. It was kind of like they tried to trick the women, because it was a part of the WASP training, and it was they tried to trick the women to go out to this, it was a lake, but the trick is it was a dry lake bed. So they'd have to go out there, and a lot of them would run out of fuel trying to find it, kind of thing. So they'd have to come back, and they didn't find it. And so, like, their navigation portion of their class was failed. So it's just like, it kind of all links into this, like, airmail and their way of navigating. And I just think about, like, we are so fortunate to be reliant on, digital for flight and maps. And, I kind of like to do the dead reckoning and like actually find like, okay, well, there's this lake that's going to be 10 miles to the right of us. And there's this town that's going to, and I kind of like to do that, but
Yeah.
we don't do that as often as they would to back.
No.
So.
No, those things are, and I know if you're listening and you haven't seen them, you can probably Google it. They some still exist. They're like giant arrows of concrete that were made to point pilots in the right direction. It was so bizarre that was, the way that it was done.
How low do you think they had to fly? Like that, those are the things that like, maybe it's like the ADHD kicking in, like how low did
From
they
arrow
fly?
to arrow?
Yeah. Because like, how it is, like, how hard it is to find an airport sometimes? You're like,
yes.
Where?
Very. Very hard. And I'm sure these arrows were not as big as like a runway, I wouldn't think.
No, they're like a basketball, like a free throw line kind of size, I would imagine. So like how did they see these? Like
I don't know. And there were so much more trees and fewer like big cities and things that they were, usually when you're looking for a runway, you can tell from your chart, okay, here, this is where the city is. The runway is going to be north of that city. If you don't have a big city, there's nothing really to gauge it to. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I remember, this is totally off topic, but I remember I had a cousin that went off to, it was in 91, I guess, Operation, was it Desert Storm in 91?
I believe so.
And I remember him telling my uncle that there's this new thing called GPS. It's just going to change everything. And it did, didn't it? Like that they had it, the military had it and had access to it, and we didn't have a clue as to what that was. And now it's like, oh my gosh, what would we do without GPS?
Well, I remember being like 16 years old, and I didn't have enough money to have a TomTom or whatever they were called back then, like the little for your car. And so I'd have to like call somebody and be like, hey, I'm lost in downtown Springfield. How do I get home?
Yeah.
There were all these one-way streets, and they'd be like, well, are you going north or south? And I'm like, I don't
know. Yeah.
So, it's just like, what? Like, yeah.
Yeah. Well, we used to, I would tell my kids, if I was like lost, you had to stop and go in like a gas station or have a quarter and use the payphone. If you could find a payphone to try to get directions, write it down and have a map. It was just like, okay, I'm going to go 2 miles, take a right by the Red Barn. And it was just so much more different than it is today. Yeah. So anyway, okay. Boy, we digressed on that subject.
Well, what's something that really stuck out to you reading this article? I know I have a few things that kind of really stuck out to me, but what else kind of?
Well, I would say, a lot of these, some of these things were just like, oh my gosh, I can't imagine being the first woman to do that. And some of them just the first person, like the parachuting and the flying a 60-horse Bobby Trout, okay, in 1929, flew a 60-horsepower engine all-night flight.
Yeah.
And it was like a 42, and then she established the endurance record of 42 hours and 3.5 minutes. Like, what the heck? How could you? I just can't imagine.
How do you even do that? Yeah.
Yeah. But there are, so, I like to read quite a bit, and I've learned a lot about these women. A lot of people don't know, like Anne Murrow Lindbergh was really instrumental in her husband, Charles Lindbergh's success, and they were a real team. Now, he was a kind of an interesting person, but there's a book called The Aviator's Wife that was about her. And she was a navigator, and of course they had this whole story of their child being kidnapped, and it was just a very, this family had a lot of history going on. But I learned a lot through books, and it was so the Aviator's Wife was one, and then there's the English pilot Beryl Markham with West with the Night. That's about her career. She flew in Kenya. She was an author, and loved her story. Loved the Aviator's Wife. Loved. Okay, so the Night Witches. I actually wrote an article for the Commemorative Air Force about the Night Witches, and they were the first women combat pilots, and they were in Russia, and they had like Marina Raskova, I think was her name. They flew, I mean, these airplanes they flew, these biplanes, they were so in World War II, because they really they weren't really technologically advanced, and they were open cockpit, and they were flying in the bitter Russian winters, like couldn't feel their hands, and would fly at night because the German soldiers wouldn't see them coming and kind of sneak in. And their story, the Night Witches, there's several books about them that I think is really interesting. There were like 3 of those women listed under the 100 most influential pilots. So I thought that was cool. And then the Flight Girls talks a little bit about, that's another book that kind of tells a story of 3 people that were in Pearl Harbor, 3 women.
Yep.
Did you read that?
Yeah, that was an intense book. Like, I could not put it down. It was really, really good. And just their stories. And I didn't know much about the WASP before that. And
yeah, it was cool. And then, so Cornelia Fort was, she was from Nashville. Her family, she was a WASP, and she was listed in here. I can't remember what she did, but I saw her name. And, oh, here it is. Okay, so Cornelia Fort, okay, she was airborne with a student in Pearl Harbor when they were attacked.
it was attacked. Yeah, I remember that. And I was like,
Yeah.
oh, my goodness.
You see the Japanese, she's up there teaching a student and witnessing the Japanese, coming in and starting to bomb, and she had to hurry up and get down on the ground. And she went on to be a WASP, and she was actually killed as a WASP. And she's from Nashville, so I kind of knew a lot about her history. She was from a wealthy family, but she loved aviation, and she loved flying and teaching students. And it was, I mean, that is a very interesting history with that pilot. She did a lot.
Yeah, when we were in Nashville, we wanted to go there because
Yeah.
it's a little runway that's been closed down, so that would have been really cool. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's just those things that kind of get you like it gets you reading, it gets you learning, and yeah, I really
Totally.
like it. Yeah.
So one of the I just finished watching this documentary on the Challenger. Do you remember the Challenger?
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember it like from then, but I I know about it now. I guess I did know about it then, but just
Yeah. So, if you watch this documentary, it's on Netflix, and we had that teacher, that female teacher that went up, and there were some female, astronauts that had gone up, and the space program was really kind of fizzling out. People just weren't that interested in it anymore. So they kind of were thinking of ways to get people interested, and they brought in this teacher. But they did this amazing documentary on what happened. And I remember watching it in school. I was in junior high school, and they rolled in the TV on the big cart, and we watched the space shuttle launch and saw it explode. And it was just like surreal.
right.
Couldn't believe it, and didn't really know what happened in this, how significant it was that she was on that flight, or that mission, I guess, whatever you want to call it. But that's another thing. I love learning about these people, and then like having it taught to me through like books or shows, and then I really want to dig more. I really want to find out more.
Get more of the like in-depth details, not just like here's what happened.
Yeah.
And like get more into their lives and what it was all about. Yeah, I think
Makes me very curious.
Yeah.
What about you?
I've always been really interested in the different airplane manufacturers, and you hear Stinson and Cessna and Mooney, and you hear all of these names, But to find out like that there were women back with these companies doing sales then, and a lot of them were navigators, passengers, wives, family members, daughters, so it's like, it was Katherine and Marjorie Stinson.
Stinson, yeah.
So, Katherine was like the first woman to fly mail. And I believe she ended up leaving because she's like, I'm not going to deal with, people downgrading me as a female pilot. So she ended up leaving and starting her own flight school. And Marjorie was the chief flight instructor. And so, like, it seems like when women are faced with, this wall of like, you can't fly, you're a woman, they find a new way. They just make their own flight school and make their own airplane, like it's like they were there. And Katherine Wright with the Wright brothers, you don't talk about the sister because it's the Wright brothers, right?
Yeah.
So she was test flying and in the very beginning as well. So it's
we never hear about her.
You never hear, like, who the heck is Katherine?
Yeah, right.
It's just, it's like, and I you don't know until you start reading these articles, and then, well, why does it not talk about her? Or, and so then, I want to know like their family history and their story and what she had to do with it. And I just love that part of aviation, and it's just made me so curious. And it's women we're kind of stubborn. And if you're not going to let us do something, we're just going to do it 10 times better in another way, So like the WASP were, told that they couldn't be, in the military, but they were, essentially flying the planes for the military.
Yeah.
Flying planes that men were learning to fly, and ferrying them and doing all of these dangerous jobs. But yet they couldn't be in the military and didn't get notarized for that till the 70s. And so,
yeah, I think that the cool thing of, one of the cool things about that is they didn't really care.
No,
they were
just
they wanted to fly, and they felt like it was the right thing to do for their country. They wanted to help however they possibly could. And it didn't matter to them if they were going to be recognized or decorated or whatever.
It wasn't for fame or anything. It was for their country. It was, they wanted to fly. It was all of those things. And Erin, and we had talked about how, her grandmother didn't, did these events with the WASP and everything, but she never went around bragging about being a pilot or doing any of these things. They went back to their normal lives and became moms and, did their normal duties, as a woman in that time frame. And, it was never spoke of again sometimes. So I think that's like now learning these history and just how they kind of like we owe us being able to fly freely and openly to all of these women and air racing and,
So true.
Yeah, for them to still to go out and do it, and to think that we're still only 7% of the 1% of pilots. It's 7%.
I know. I don't know why that is exactly. I don't know if there's just there aren't that many women interested in it, or because people ask all the time, why do you think there aren't many women in aviation? And I think there's still a lot of traditional, role emphasis on the female, that if they want to have kids, someone's going to need to be home and make sure the kids are taken care of. And that's traditionally the women's kind of role, responsibility
around the world. Right. But I think that's why I love this podcast and why I love doing this is there's so many careers and opportunities in aviation. It's just not, you're an airline pilot and you're gone away from your family. Mm-hmm. There's you and me that have, other things going on in our lives and we're pilots. There's people that do air racing as something for fun or a career on the side. There's just so much to it that Patty Wagstaff. I mean, she's a total baller,
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
Heather and, just Nicole has children. I mean, there's so many people that have children and have this balance that so you can be all of those things. And I think that's one thing I really want to push to other females is that, there's opportunity for anything as long as you want it hard enough.
True. Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. And who else? Stuck out to you?
So Bessie Coleman was the first African American period pilot, which I think is awesome. I don't know where the men were at this point, probably working, lots of hard jobs, but kudos to her for being the first African American pilot. And who was the African American pilot that ended up kind of starting? She was one of the first females that helped start what then was formed as like the Tuskegee Airmen.
Oh yeah. What was her name? Oh man, I do remember that person.
This is so bad. There is this huge article.
Oh, there's just all this information on Martha King, and she's the only woman to hold every class of pilot and instructor rating.
Oh, that's King Schools. Yeah.
Yeah.
King Schools. Like if you guys have not, I personally have not used their stuff, but I've heard really amazing things about their King School.
Yeah.
So that's okay. So it was Willa. Willa was her name.
Okay. Tell me more about her.
So Willa became an instructor, and she was one of the first women. She was the first woman Civil Air Patrol. Her husband was Cornelius Coffee, which I think would make a really cool coffee company.
Yes, I agree.
That's the first thing I thought when I saw that. But yes, so they started their own School of Aeronautics. They were the first U.S. government approved school for aviation for Black. Mm-hmm. The school ran the studies that led to the Army to admit Blacks to the U.S. Army Air Corps, and then they began the Tuskegee Airmen. So I think that is so cool to know that history and that a woman was behind that with her husband, and that was such a support system. And
so there's there was a woman, Geraldine Mock, who flew. She was from Columbus, Ohio, actually, and she was the first woman to fly around the world. Okay. And she did it and I went to a talk in Cincinnati before COVID and everything hit about her. I didn't know a thing about her. Geraldine Mock in 1964, first woman to fly around the world in a Cessna 180.
Okay.
Named the Spirit of Columbus. And there's actually couple of books. 38 Charlie was the name of her airplane, and that was a book that she put together about her travels. And then the Jerry Mock story. And she was just a housewife. Wow. That learned to fly and had this goal that she was going to go around the world and in a single engine airplane, and she did it.
What year was that? Do you remember?
1964.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. And then, so back to the whole space thing, there is a documentary called Mercury 13 on Netflix.
Okay.
It's interesting. They had these women that they were putting through the astronaut testing and their own kind of program. And there were 13 women that made it through, but then they decided to end the program. I believe it was because they didn't want to progress with female astronauts. And Jerry Cobb and then Wally Funk was the name of a couple of them, and there's a documentary on Netflix about this. This is interesting. Wally Funk, I met her at a Women in Aviation convention, and she was one of 25 women chosen to undergo the testing. She went on to be an FAA inspector, and then she worked for the NTSB, which I thought would always be really cool, working as an investigator with the NTSB.
I mean, it'd be interesting, definitely, because I'm kind of the person that always like, what went wrong?
Yeah.
And why did this happen? And, but at the same time, I think it would be very sad.
Oh God, yeah. So do you watch those shows like air disasters and things like that where they do the investigations?
I don't typically, because I think, I had my muffler come apart on my airplane, and I'm lucky that I didn't take off with it because it was coming into the cockpit. So just stuff like that kind of makes me fearful that something could happen in flight and that kind of stuff. So I've listened to some podcasts that the ATC is talking to the pilot, and you hear them and it kind of talks you through like what they could have done different, or the way that the ATC was able to help them, or just kind of different scenarios. And I like those because usually they're somewhat better of outcomes. Or, to walk you through it. So like if it did happen, like what you could do to, get through that situation. So I kind of do, but it also makes me very nervous. And then I get like a little bit.
Start thinking about all things that could go wrong.
Yeah. Really. So.
Yeah, I do think they're interesting. I like to hear, but I've always been into kind of like the forensic science, like murder shows, and where they go back and they talk about, they break it down into how they figured it out. And I'm always interested to hear, sometimes it's just like the littlest thing that could have been prevented, or something that was said, the communication between two people that they were too afraid to speak up and not to clarify what they were saying, that led to like this, terrible outcome. And I think, we need to learn from those kinds of things so that we don't, we got to realize how important it is to be clear, and like, we don't care about being, hurting anybody's feelings. And you just got to like save people's lives and do what has to be done. If you have a question, don't be quiet, speak up.
And ATC is there to help you. Anybody that is on the radio is there to help you. They're not there to criticize your calls, or that was one thing I was really scared learning flying, because I was at an untowered airport, and then being on flight following just scared the heck out of me. And now I'm just like, what? It is what it is. You have to be more precise when you're getting into instrument flying, but by that time you're getting better on your calls and, precision.
Yes.
But I had listened to a podcast once about this guy that was flying, and he was like trying to get transferred over to untowered airport. He was on flight following or something, and the tower ATC guy was, like, oh, can you make a left turn, to 090, descend to, 2,000 feet, and the guy just was not doing what he was told. Like, he would repeat it back, but he wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
So the ATC actually had caught on that he was a little bit
hypoxic or something?
Being hypoxic.
Oh.
And so he's like, I need you to descend now. I need you to, and he's like, do you have supplemental oxygen? And the guy's like, yes, but I don't have it on. And, and so the guy's like, can you put that on for me? Can you descend a little bit for me? Can you make a turn? Trying to get him to do step by step. And he saved his life.
Wow.
So trust, it's like not every controller is going to catch up on that. So, just things that you can kind of help yourself. And got off subject, but I really love that kind of stuff. And
True. Well, should we wrap up this one?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I was just thinking, though, I was writing down some of these books and some of these videos that you can find online. I think at the end of this, on our YouTube and podcast, we will try to leave a link and some of these on the last little blurb. And that way you guys can know where to find these books
Exactly.
and shows. And I think they've become very handy, especially this article. So we'll definitely have to throw that in there.
Yeah, I agree.
We'll throw those in there for you guys. And I hope that you've learned something today. Stay tuned for some awesome guests we have lined out for this year, some giveaways, the videos. I mean, who doesn't want to see the?
Yeah.
Thank you guys so much for this year, and we hope to see more of you.
Yeah, I'm excited. Thank you so much for watching and listening to this episode of Cockpits and Cocktails. And I'm empty. Are you empty?
I'm empty.
Yeah.
Have a good one.
Good night. See ya.